Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestle News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well. As always, we have a ton of news stories to get into today. So let's start off with the WWE news stories and let's start off talking about Brock Lesnar. Now, obviously, the return to fans to WWE television, the return to touring that WWE is embarking on in July, and of course, SummerSlam on the horizon in Allegiant Stadium in August has led to a lot of speculation that Brock Lesnar is set to return to the company. We've seen separate reports saying that Brock Lesnar is scheduled for SummerSlam, that he isn't scheduled for SummerSlam, that we've heard rumors that WWE are talking about Brock Lesnar, what they want him to do. We're finally going to get the Brock Lesnar versus Bobby Lashley match. What is going on? Well, we have another report when it comes to Brock Lesnar and possibly his WWE future. Bear in mind, this is a guy hasn't even signed a WWE contract right now. Technically, he's still a free agent. Now, obviously, the expectation is that he's going to return to WWE, but it is quite ironic, isn't it, that all of these discussions about Brock Lesnar, his return, plans for SummerSlam, no plans for SummerSlam, he's not even under contract right now. It's crazy. But there are reportedly people within WWE who do want to save Brock Lesnar's return for a big match against Universal Champion Roman Reigns. Now, as I mentioned, Lesnar has been rumored to return to WWE for the upcoming SummerSlam event, pay-per-view, but this has not been confirmed. It was recently reported that Lesnar was mentioned early on in discussions for a potential SummerSlam plan, as the company wanted to do something big with him for the biggest show of the summer, considering it's in Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, and there's lots of tickets to sell, but nothing is official. Now, as I mentioned, there have been rumors and speculation on Brock Lesnar possibly challenging WWE Champion Bobby Lashley, something Lashley himself has wanted for several years at this point, and the WWE Universe and fans around the world have wanted to see Brock Lesnar versus Bobby Lashley, even predating Bobby Lashley returning to WWE in 2018. Now, in an update, Lesnar versus Lashley was not planned for SummerSlam as of last week. This is according to Dave Meltzer on the Sunday Night's Main Event podcast. Now, bringing Lesnar back will be a decision made by WWE Chairman and CEO Vince McMahon, and the Lashley match could happen at any time, but the company had not called Lesnar to return at SummerSlam as of last week, according to this new report. This is what this is what Meltzer is saying. Lesnar doesn't say anything. Furthermore, it was noted that there are forces within WWE. Forces? What how dramatic word that is. There are officials. Forces. There are officials within WWE that don't want Lesnar being brought back until Roman Reigns is ready to feud with him. Now, there's no word on when that will be, but Lesnar versus Reigns for the title would be a SummerSlam or WrestleMania level match. Lesnar, of course, has been away from WWE since dropping the WWE Championship to Drew McIntyre in the main event of WrestleMania 36 Night 2 in 2020. His WWE contract reportedly expired last August without two sides reaching an agreement on new terms, despite extensive negotiations. At that time, Lesnar's merchandise was removed from the WWEshop.com website, but he remains a member of the Raw roster as of recording right now. While Lesnar's deal did expire last year, it's always been expected that he will return to WWE eventually. As I mentioned, the 2021 SummerSlam pay-per-view is scheduled for Saturday, August 21 from Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, Nevada. While the 1992 SummerSlam was taped on a Saturday in England, this will be the first time the biggest event of the summer airs on a Saturday night and the first time it airs from an NFL stadium. So when it comes to this, look, I'm like everyone else at this point. The discussions and the idea of, Brock Lesnar, he's a free agent. Could he go to AEW or could he go to New Japan? It's not happening. If Brock Lesnar is wrestling, he is wrestling for the WWE. The expectation is now, and it's always been, that Brock Lesnar will return to WWE. Those are just the facts. That is how it's going to work out. Brock Lesnar, when he decides he wants to wrestle again, he will wrestle for WWE. For whatever reason, Brock Lesnar has this loyalty to WWE and Vince McMahon. If he's going to wrestle anyway, it'll be for WWE. I know he did those New Japan dates way back when, but Brock Lesnar isn't going to Japan anytime soon because, frankly, no other company, and maybe AEW with Tony Khan's billions, but realistically, no other company is paying Brock Lesnar's salary. That contract is ginormous. The reason that Brock Lesnar hasn't re-signed with the WWE between now and when his contract expired last August is because during a pandemic, Brock Lesnar's contract was not financially viable. The amount of money that WWE were paying him for the limited amount of dates and appearances was not financially viable during a pandemic. Brock Lesnar is a box office attraction. Brock Lesnar sells tickets. The issue is, during the pandemic, performing in front of no fans, there are no tickets to be sold. There is no box office that is open. Therefore, Brock Lesnar's contract is not financially viable during a period of time where money is tighter than it usually would be. Obviously, WWE can talk about their record revenues and record profits and all that kind of stuff. But let's be honest here. Brock Lesnar's deal during a pandemic It's just not good business. Now, with WWE returning to touring and WWE performing once again in front of live crowds and live fans and having to sell out arenas or having to sell tickets, whether it's for Raw, SmackDown, Money in the Bank, SummerSlam, or whatever, Brock Lesnar's contract suddenly becomes financially viable once again for the first time in a while. So the expectation as it is now is always as it has been with Brock Lesnar, and that is that he sells tickets. Once you need to sell tickets, Brock Lesnar will come back. Myself personally, yeah, look, we've seen Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar. We've seen it probably far too many times. We've certainly seen it in 2 WrestleMania main events, WrestleMania 31, WrestleMania 34. Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns, it does interest me. Don't get me wrong. It does interest me. And the reason why is even though we have seen it a ton of times, even though we have seen it, as I mentioned, WrestleMania 31, WrestleMania 34, SummerSlam 2018, the Brock Lesnar Roman Reigns thing, it's been overdone to death. But this version of Roman Reigns is completely different. I don't have a problem with doing these kind of rematches or doing these kind of matches that we have seen before if it's different context, if it's different characters. If it was the Roman Reigns of 2018, the babyface smiling Roman Reigns, I'm the big dog, this is my yard, all that kind of stuff versus Brock Lesnar, I have no interest in seeing that. But this Roman Reigns is different. This Roman Reigns character is completely different. You've got the heel version. You've got the tribal chief. You've got the Universal Champion. You've also got Paul Heyman in the mix now. Paul Heyman is the advocate for Brock Lesnar, but he's also the special counsel to the tribal chief. All of that kind of stuff makes a Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns match and feud and storyline far more interesting and different to what it was previously. It's something we haven't seen before. If Brock Lesnar comes back and he feuds with Roman Reigns, I don't think Roman Reigns is going to turn into a babyface anytime soon. What does Brock Lesnar become? Does he become a babyface? Brock as a babyface? As a tweener? I mean, Brock Lesnar, I guess, isn't really a heel or a babyface. He's just Brock Lesnar. He's just crazy. So maybe they could do a situation where Roman Reigns is still a heel and Brock Lesnar comes back and he's just Brock Lesnar. He's just facing a heel opponent. They kind of did that in 2015, when Brock Lesnar had the feud with Seth Rollins when he came back, and after Seth Rollins had cashed in, ironically, on the Roman Reigns-Brock Lesnar match at WrestleMania. When Brock Lesnar came back, he was a babyface in the sense that he was facing a heel, but Brock Lesnar's actions never really changed because then The Undertaker came back and Brock Lesnar suddenly became a heel once again. So I don't think it necessarily matters too much when it comes to Lesnar because Brock Lesnar is Brock Lesnar. Now, personally, I don't see the issue in Brock Lesnar returning at SummerSlam, having the match against Bobby Lashley, and then maybe transitioning to Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns, say at WrestleMania next year. I don't see the issue with that. I think that, no, I understand WWE's rationale, or some WWE officials going, well, if Brock's going to come back, he's going to have to come back in the biggest avenue possible. We wanted to come back in the biggest match possible, and Reigns versus Lesnar because of the Paul Heyman dynamic, because of their history, all that kind of stuff. It's a massive deal, so that can be a massive match, but that doesn't change if Brock Lesnar comes back and faces Bobby Lashley at SummerSlam. Brock Lesnar comes back, faces Bobby Lashley at SummerSlam, which is a big match, a match that people have wanted to see, that Bobby Lashley's wanted for a while. That doesn't change the size of Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns, say at WrestleMania next year. It doesn't. If anything, it builds anticipation. Because the moment Brock Lesnar comes back, then you can start having discussions of, well, is Brock going to have an issue with Reigns? Because let's say if Brock's on Raw and Reigns is on SmackDown, then Paul Heyman will just do both shows. They'll exist in different universes, different entities. It's kind of like when Paul Heyman was the advocate for Brock Lesnar in 2013, and on the same show, at the same time, he was also CM Punk's manager. They just didn't really talk about it. There was a situation where at WrestleMania 29, where Paul Heyman was the advocate. He was there at ringside for CM Punk during the match against The Undertaker. The very next match was Triple H versus Brock Lesnar, and Paul Heyman came back out, and they kind of just didn't talk about it. Now, eventually, they built to a match where Paul Heyman turned on CM Punk, and eventually it was Brock Lesnar versus CM Punk at SummerSlam 2013. But if you have Brock on Raw, which would be desperately needed for Raw in terms of its ratings right now, he can feud with Bobby Lashley. You've got Paul Heyman on Raw with Brock. On SmackDown, you've got Paul Heyman with Reigns. And then eventually, you continuously just keep building to WrestleMania, where eventually Paul Heyman has to make the decision, is it Brock or Reigns? And I don't know what decision he would make. Now, I don't know if necessarily the Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar feud should be all about Paul Heyman, but there's certainly an interesting story to tell there. So, as of right now, Brock Lesnar isn't scheduled for SummerSlam. Plans can and will change. I know Aleister Black doesn't like people saying that, but they do in WWE. Plans do change. So we'll have to wait and see on that one, but it's certainly interesting. Io Shirai. Yes, Io Shirai is back on NXT. She made her return last night during the episode of NXT on the USA Network. During last night's show, music star Poppy also made a return to NXT to release her latest album during a backstage segment with Triple H and NXT General Manager William Regal. Now, the segment saw Dexter Lumis approach Poppy with a drawing that he did of the singer. She then hugged him until NXT Women's Tag Team Champion Indy Hartwell walked in. Hartwell then stormed off crying at the sight of Poppy hugging Lumis as the drama between Dexter Lumis and Indy Hartwell continues. This led to NXT Women's Champion, Tag Team Champion Candice LeRae going to the ring to call out Poppy. LeRae then hit the ring and ranted about Poppy, as she has done on social media and NXT television as of late. LeRae offered Poppy to come out and take one of the two options, take the easy way out and apologize, or take the hard way out and get introduced to the parking lot. Poppy then came out on the stage and said that she didn't wrestle, but she knows someone that does. This is when the lights went out, Io Shirai's music hit, and out she came. She attacked Candice LeRae with a bunch of offense, including a missile drop kick and the tiger feint kick. LeRae then retreated to the stage as the fans chanted for Shirai to welcome her back. The segment then ended with Poppy and Shirai celebrating. This, of course, is the third appearance with Poppy and Shirai together, as Poppy previously performed ring entrances for the former NXT Women's Champion. Now, Io Shirai also had a later brief stare down with the current NXT Women's Champion Raquel Gonzalez and Dakota Kai. After NXT returned from the commercial break, the announcers aired a replay of Shirai and Poppy passing Gonzalez and Kai backstage. Now, of course, this is Shirai's first appearance since losing the NXT Women's Championship to Gonzalez during night one of NXT TakeOver Stand and Deliver event during WrestleMania 37 weekend in April. So this was obviously great to have Io Shirai back. I was kind of feeling that maybe she wasn't going to return to NXT, like she was done in NXT because of NXT TakeOver Stand and Deliver, drop the Women's Championship, and then she would go to Raw and SmackDown after WrestleMania. That hasn't happened. I don't know if there were plans for that to happen. I don't know. I still think Io Shirai is destined for the main roster soon. She kind of has to be, because there are so many, because of the releases, because of the talent cuts, all that kind of stuff. She's especially for like Raw, but even SmackDown, because they've got no female talent on that show at the moment. She's so desperately needed just because of bodies, but also because of quality. I thought she was going to go to Raw SmackDown post-WrestleMania because of her absence. She didn't. Now she's back on NXT. What she's going to do? We've heard rumors. I think Triple H has even said it himself on a couple of the media calls for NXT takeovers that Poppy has expressed a desire to wrestle, a desire to compete. I think Triple H and WWE and NXT look at a similar situation to how well Bad Bunny did at WrestleMania and say, why can't we do the same with Poppy and NXT? Poppy, for whatever reason, because of her songs, because of her performances, has an affiliation with NXT, and they maybe look at that and say, why can't we do Poppy in the same way that we did Bad Bunny for WrestleMania? Why can't we do Poppy for an upcoming NXT TakeOver? Now, Poppy isn't going to wrestle at NXT TakeOver in your house on Sunday, but I could possibly see her performing at, say, an NXT TakeOver on the weekend of SummerSlam, maybe in Vegas. That could happen, or maybe on the week of NXT of SummerSlam. Maybe it's going to happen on the Tuesday, or maybe it happens on, I don't know what date it would be, maybe the Thursday, who knows. I could see that happening. Again, she has expressed a desire to wrestle, so maybe it could be a situation where it's Poppy and Io Shirai versus either Indy Hartwell and Candice LeRae, or, as they tease later on in the show, maybe it's Poppy and Io Shirai versus Raquel Gonzalez and Dakota Kai. Either or, I think, works there. So I think there's something larger at play here, obviously. Of course, it's great to see Io Shirai back. Personally, I look at this and I say, before I was saying what's left for Io Shirai to do on NXT. Now, you could argue what's left for her to do is win the NXT Women's Tag Team Championships. Is she going to win that with Poppy? I don't know if that's necessarily the right choice. You've got to have some credibility on this championship. Having a singer come in and win a championship is basically a bit of a no-no in the world of professional wrestling. David Arquette, I know he's an actor, but you get my point there. So I don't know, but I think we are probably going into a situation soon. I think it's inevitable going into a situation soon where we're looking at Io Shirai and Poppy teaming up. For what? I don't know. For what? I really don't know. But certainly interesting, no doubt. But moving on, let's talk about Monday Night Raw. Let's talk about the Raw ratings this past week, because we do have the ratings information for Monday Night Raw. Now, obviously, last week with the Memorial Day episode of Monday Night Raw and a record low or a near record low. I forget which one it was, but not a good, I think it was like the lowest audience ever for Monday Night Raw. There was a lot of intrigue and interest as to what the Raw ratings were going to be this week. Well, especially considering that ending for Monday Night Raw this week with Shayna Baszler and Lily. Monday's live WWE Raw episode featuring Alexa's Playground segment with Alexa Bliss and Shayna Baszler as the main event drew an average of 1.640 million viewers on the USA Network. This is according to Nielsen via John Urand of Sports Business Journal and PW Torch. Now, this number is up 5.3% from last week's 1.557 million viewers for the Memorial Day episode, which was the second lowest viewership in the show history. For this week's show, the first hour drew 1.667 million viewers. Last week's first hour was 1.536 million. The second hour drew 1.651 million viewers. Last week's second hour was 1.549 million viewers. And the final hour drew 1.602 million viewers. Last week's third hour was 1.586. This week's Raw rating drew a 0.48 rating in the key 18 to 49 demographic. This is up 9% from last week's 0.44 rating in the key demographic. Now, this week's Raw viewership was down 5.6% from the same week in 2020, while this week's 18 to 49 key demographic was down 9.4% from the same week in 2022. Now, I saw people celebrating this like it was some form of victory this week, going, see, they went up. The Raw ratings went up. You're not going to cover that, are you? Or you're not going to cover that. Really? You're celebrating that? Memorial Day weekend or a Memorial Day show is always going to do a really bad number. Really bad. And the numbers aren't great for Raw anyway. So a Memorial Day, a holiday day episode, whatever the holiday is, never does well for WWE. So it was expected that they would do a low number last week. 1.557 million viewers last week was rubbish, was awful. And this week they're celebrating a 1.640 for Monday Night Raw. You know, look at this in context. 1.640 is still terrible. The ratings are awful for that show. Previously, when you had, like, say, a 1.7 or a 1.8, you would say, well, it's not great, but I guess that's Raw at this point. 1.6? Seriously? And they're down 5.6% from the same week in 2020. 5.6% from a show that was in front of 0 fans, in front of an empty performance center with nobody there and just cold nothingness. At least now you've got the Thunderdome, you've got the glitz and the glamour. You remember when they said the glitz and the glamour of the Thunderdome were going to improve the ratings? They haven't. They haven't. Guess why? Because the show's still bad. The show's still bad. How can you present what you presented? Maybe the Raw mostly, it actually was pretty good on Monday, but certainly that closing segment, how can you present that and then be happy? Be happy with what you've got? Because frankly, again, people could look at this. I saw people look at it on social media, say, see, it was up. The ratings were up. The viewership was up. Okay, it was up. Not by a lot, considering everything, but they were up. And then they saw that ending. Why would they tune in next week? Why? Unless they've got some form of, I guess, morbid curiosity, as if to say, well, I'll tune in just to see how bad it's going to be again. Because that ending was not good. That ending was not good. And again, in the same vein that they've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years at this point, WWE, it's always, well, wait until something else. 2019, it was, well, okay, wait until the season premiere. Wait until the season premiere of Raw. Wait until new sets and new music. Wait until SmackDown goes on Fox and we're going to do a big draft and we're going to reset everything and the ratings are going to be great. Obviously, the pandemic then happened, but last year they did the same. Wait until the Thunderdome. Wait until the Thunderdome. We're going to move to the Thunderdome. It's going to be glitz. It's going to be glamour and the ratings are going to go up. It's still not a crowd, but it's going to be better. And now they're doing it again. Wait until live crowds. Wait until live crowds. It's always wait until something to bail WWE out of bad content. Wait until this. Wait until the draft. Wait until SummerSlam. We're waiting. We've been waiting for a while. And it's still not a great show. It's still a 3-hour show that's been going on for nearly 10 years at this point as a 3-hour show. And it's still not good. So what are we waiting for? Because I don't know anymore. I really don't know. Let's go back to NXT and let's talk about the $1 Million Championship. Because as expected, as reported, the $1 Million title has returned to WWE. Last night's TakeOver In Your House Go Home edition of NXT saw Hall of Famer Ted DiBiase bring back the $1 Million Championship. He announced that Cameron Grimes versus LA Knight at NXT TakeOver will now be a ladder match for the $1 Million Championship, which will be hanging high above the ring. The winner will hold the title and carry on Ted's $1 Million legacy. So again, this has been expected. This has been reported, obviously, and it's still legitimately, that is the real $1 Million Championship. Again, expected. When they said they've got the big $1 Million announcement, they knew this was going to happen. As far as who wins it, logic would suggest that maybe Cameron Grimes win it, but I wouldn't be surprised if LA Knight wins it. I really wouldn't. But look, I've enjoyed the Ted DiBiase involvement on NXT TakeOver. As I mentioned before, I would prefer that there is more of it, not from Ted DiBiase maybe necessarily, but more legends, because that's realistically what I think this show needs, especially when they were in competition with AEW. I know they're not anymore, but the ratings still aren't that much better, frankly. Get more recognizable names on that show. Get more stars on that show. Now, is Ted DiBiase really moving the needle? No. But getting some legends in, having legends be managers of talent, having legends be characters on the show or whatever, just makes the show feel a bit more compelling. You have to realize, again, that the whole point of NXT, whilst Johnny Gargano doesn't think it's developmental, it is. And by having a developmental show, it's names that aren't widely recognized at this point. And because of that, you've only really got a hardcore fan base. There isn't a casual appeal to a lot of these names. By having some big names on that show, whether it's legends or Hall of Famers that come in, that grabs the attention of the more casual audience and says, well, okay, well, maybe I'll tune into NXT this week because I like Ted DiBiase. It reminds me of my youth. NXT has an older audience anyway, so they like your Ted DiBiases. They like whatever, legends you want to bring in. I think it would help the show. So why not carry on with it? And TakeOver looks to be a good card at the weekend. I think TakeOver, though, to be honest, it doesn't... Again, it's a good card on paper, and obviously we'll be doing a watch-along and a reaction stream for it, but it does kind of feel like it's just kind of there. I don't know if I have the hype that I did for the In Your House TakeOver last year. It just kind of feels like all the matches were announced in the last couple of weeks or so, and things have just sort of radically, TakeOver suddenly appeared. The announcement for this TakeOver was made a while ago, but even the announcement for the NXT Championship match was only made last week, and that was 2 weeks before the event. It kind of feels all a bit rushed. Ironically, the $1 Million Championship storyline hasn't been. This one's been planned out for quite a while with Cameron Grimes and the Ted DiBiase segments and all that kind of stuff. So I'm excited for this. I think it's exciting to have the $1 Million Championship back. It's not the first time they've done it, obviously. There's been other stars that have had the $1 Million Championship, whether it's Stone Cold Steve Austin, the Ringmaster, or whether it's Ted DiBiase Jr. So they wouldn't be the first person to try and carry on Ted's $1 Million legacy. Whether or not it actually does continue, we'll have to wait and see. But it's exciting. And another ladder match for TakeOver. TakeOver feels like it has a ladder match every single time at this point. Let's move back to Monday Night Raw and talk about Jackson Ryker briefly. Do we have to? But current creative plans reportedly call for Jackson Ryker to be a babyface on the Raw brand. Now, this week's episode of Raw saw Ryker debut a new look and continue his feud with his former tag team partner Elias 1 week after Elias walked out on the former United States Marine during Memorial Day match against the Raw Tag Team Champions AJ Styles and Omos. Now, this week's match ended in a count-out victory for Ryker as Elias walked out on the match. Now, in an update, PW Insider reports that the plan moving forward is for Ryker to be on the babyface side of the Red brand roster, while Elias will continue working as a heel. There had been some speculation on Elias and Ryker switching roles, but word is now that Ryker will be working as a face. I mean, realistically, I'm speechless. I'm actually kind of speechless for this one, because I think a lot of people saw this coming. As soon as they had Elias ditch Jackson Ryker last week, everyone went, oh no. They're trying to make this guy a babyface. Because it was Memorial Day. Obviously, Ryker has a military background, and Elias ditched him. Then he did the promo. Even before the match, they started talking about Ryker going, are you ready for war? He goes, I'm always ready for war. You know that. So they're playing on his military background. And again, they did the Memorial Day stuff. And now this week, they're trying to hype up that, Jackson Ryker's got all of this intensity and all this kind of stuff. And he's got this military background. And I'm not knocking the guy for a military background whatsoever. You have to respect that. And you have to, obviously, I'm not from the United States, but you have to commend him on his service to his country, and you have to admire that. But this guy ain't a babyface. Any chances this guy had of being a babyface ended when he posted that tweet last year. Now, if you're not familiar, Jackson Ryker was called up as part of the Forgotten Sons faction on SmackDown on Fox during a lot of political controversy at the time. He posted a tweet on Twitter supporting the former president of the United States, and suddenly the entirety, pretty much, of the WWE locker room didn't want to work with the guy, hated the guy, didn't necessarily want to see him fired, but they didn't want to work with him. He had nuclear heat, as they would call it at the time. So the Forgotten Sons were taken off of television, and then ironically, the guy that got the heat, the guy that was hated backstage, he's the only one still employed by WWE. Steve Cutler, gone. He's signed with Impact right now. He was released. Wesley Blake, gone. He was released back in April. So the guy that gets the heat actually gets the push and the babyface turn? Look at that logic. And look, this could work. This could work if WWE was sticking in the Thunderdome for a year or 18 more months because they can control the fan reaction. The WWE producer can tell the Thunderdome audience boo or cheer. And they could say cheer for Jackson Ryker, and they would pipe in those cheers, and they would pipe in that crowd reaction of everyone loving Jackson Ryker. The issue is they're getting back in front of a live audience next month, and that audience isn't going to cheer Jackson Ryker. I mean, I guess WWE might look at it as, well, you know, certain states will, considering certain states voted for the former president, right? Certain states might like Jackson Ryker. People don't forget, in this modern era, in this modern day and age, with social media and everything's recorded for eternity, people don't forget. This isn't like the 1980s or the 1990s or even the early 2000s where you said something and then it was gone. Nowadays, people remember stuff. People remember tweets. People remember articles because they're put on the internet and then they live forever. My comments live forever when I say this. And in the same vein that Jackson Ryker's comments that he posted last year, they live forever and people don't forget. So the idea that people are going to cheer this guy just isn't going to happen. WWE can try all they want and they can hope all they want that they're going to return to touring and everyone's going to love Jackson Ryker. Not happening. In the same vein, I know it's slightly different, but people booed Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania this year because they don't forget. And people don't forget when it comes to Jackson Ryker. They won't. They just won't. And as far as I'm aware, has he even posted anything asking for forgiveness or saying he's sorry? I don't think he has. And even if he does, it won't matter because people don't forget. This guy isn't going to be a babyface at all. So the timing of it is odd. I know they're going to try and lend on his military background. It's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. And if WWE thinks it will, they're beyond deluded. Beyond deluded. Going back to NXT. We have a match announced for next week's episode on the USA Network. The Tommaso Ciampa and Timothy Thatcher feud against the Grizzled Young Veterans will finally come to a head during next week's NXT episode on the USA Network. It's been announced that Ciampa and Thatcher will face the Grizzled Young Veterans in a tornado tag team match where all four competitors will be in the ring doing battle at once. I'm excited for this one because I just love the tag team of Tommaso Ciampa and Timothy Thatcher. I'm a huge Timothy Thatcher fan. Obviously, the Grizzled Young Veterans being Brits, I enjoy their work. And I think they're actually very good on the mic. But I have no qualms about this one. I'm excited about this one. Hopefully, one of these tag teams eventually becomes NXT Tag Team Champions because I think they have all the talent. Like I said, Timothy Thatcher. Yeah, I mean, he can be anything. I would say I want to see him on the main roster. My concern would be that it would make him into something goofy. But he's so unique and he is so different that he could be something so fun. And whether or not he gets to the main roster or time will only tell. But I'm excited for this one next week. Should be a lot of fun. Speaking of NXT as well, we have a winners take all match. 6-man tag team match set for NXT TakeOver in your house. It was announced last night on NXT on the USA Network that it'll be a winners take all 6-man tag team match where MSK and Bronson Reed defend the NXT Tag Team Championships and the North American Championship against Legado del Fantasma at NXT TakeOver in your house. I'm excited for this one, and personally, myself, I would prefer it. I really would prefer it if Legado del Fantasma won that match because I'm just a huge Santos Escobar fan. I think the guy has just a ton of potential. I've talked several times on this channel about how WWE have been trying for years and years to replace Rey Mysterio, whether it's with Alberto Del Rio, Andrade, Kalisto, Sin Cara, Humberto Carrillo, the list goes on and on. Have all many people they've tried to replace him with. If there is a guy that I think is ready to step into the Rey Mysterio shoes as the next big Hispanic, Latino babyface, or just Latino star on that roster, it's Santos Escobar. The guy is an absolute stud. He's a star. He's got a great look. He's got a great gimmick. He's a great worker, and most importantly for Vince McMahon, the guy speaks good English. Now that shouldn't matter, but in the eyes of Vince McMahon it does. So part of me really would want Legado del Fantasma to win that match. I don't know if he will, considering Bronson Reed has literally only just won the NXT North American Championship. He won it, 2-3 weeks ago? So I don't know if he would drop it so quickly. I suppose if Legado del Fantasma lose, there's a possibility they go to the main roster because what is there for them to do in NXT after this, realistically? I mean, if they don't win the bouts, where do they go? I think they would be a lot of fun on the main roster. Put him on Monday Night Raw, Santos Escobar can go right into the main event. He's just that good. He's just that talented. But I'm excited for this one. I think this one's going to be a lot of fun this coming Sunday at NXT TakeOver. Let's talk about Billy Corgan and the NWA. Now, don't worry, I am going to talk about the big NWA announcement that was made last night regarding, obviously, the NWA All-Women's Pay-Per-View by Mickie James. I'm going to talk about that in the Impact video I do today, because I think that's I think that's very interesting. Now, what I did want to talk about was Billy Corgan talking about how, according to him, WWE did turn down purchasing the NWA before he purchased the company, which is a fascinating story when you think about it. I mean, it really is a fascinating story when you think about it. So he was on a podcast. He was on an episode of a podcast. He was on Talk Is Jericho, and he said that essentially WWE had turned down the opportunity to purchase the company, and it allowed him to buy it, which is certainly fascinating when you look at it. I won't read into all the comments because it's a very long interview. But essentially, yeah, he says that WWE turned down to purchase the NWA before he bought the company. And you wonder why. I would think that WWE ultimately decided to turn down purchasing it because this is, 2016, 2017, just after the whole Impact Wrestling debacle with Billy Corgan. I think WWE ultimately looked at it because they said, okay, what's the value here? What's the value of them purchasing the NWA? WWE looks to purchase companies most of the time nowadays for the tape library. That's pretty much it. They don't care about assets. They don't care about rings or anything like that, or talents that they may have to contracts. They care about tape library. And the NWA, frankly, doesn't have a ton of it. Now, obviously, you could say, well, they're the oldest pro wrestling company in the world. They were founded, 73 years ago or something like that. They have a heritage that goes back to the early 1900s and all that kind of stuff. That is true. But how much of the tape library did they genuinely own? It's not a lot. Because all of the NWA stuff was at Jim Crockett Promotions. WWE owns that. Whether it's early NWA stuff, I don't even know if the NWA owns that footage because it was all in different territories. My point being, when Billy Corgan purchased the NWA, he wasn't purchasing that much. He was purchasing the name, the logos, the championships. That was about it. There isn't this huge tape library there, because if there was, they would have put it all on YouTube when they were doing all of this kind of stuff, and they don't have it. They just don't have that. So I think WWE, they looked at it and they said, we're not really purchasing that much here. Now, Billy Corgan, I think he's done a good job. I enjoyed the initial NWA Power series on YouTube. I think recently some of their decisions maybe have been questionable. I wasn't, the whole putting power on behind a paywall on Fight TV. I know that upset people. I look at it as just, it's business. It is what it is. Look, they're in a pandemic. They can't exactly run live events to make a ton of money. So I'm not against that. I'm not huge on, Dave Marquez being let go and that whole situation, the way that went. I was a fan of his work. I think he does excellent work, and I was a fan of him doing the podium interviews on that initial NWA Power. And I did enjoy the initial NWA Power series. Now, again, reportedly, some of the people they have in, talents, Tyrus and people like that, I don't necessarily agree with that. And I've heard the stories about the ending to the pay-per-view this past weekend and all this kind of stuff. There are certainly questionable decisions by the NWA, but look, more promotions are more places for people to work and people to make a living, and that's what we need. We kind of have a monopoly on the pro wrestling business, so I'm not too much of a complainer about NWA or anything like that. Now, will I watch the NWA 73rd anniversary pay-per-view? I mean, all of that kind of stuff depends on what NWA presents. I didn't watch the pay-per-view this past weekend because there was nothing to hook me in. There's a lot of pro wrestling right now. There's nothing really there to hook me in. When it comes to the all-women's pay-per-view, I'm very interested in that, so I'll probably watch that. When it comes to the NWA 73rd anniversary pay-per-view that they do, again, if it's something worth watching, we'll watch it, and we'll do it here on the channel. But, the NWA is just, they are what they are right now, frankly. And finally, I do want to talk about this. I know it's been a long episode today, but we'll end on this one. CM Punk talking about Roman Reigns. Now, CM Punk was a special guest on the Wrestling Perspective podcast, and he spoke about Roman Reigns and his current run as the Universal Champion. Now, CM Punk praised Reigns, saying he believes that Reigns is the best wrestler in WWE, although it took WWE far too long to get him to this point. Punk noted, organic stories are the best stories in wrestling, and that's what you're getting right now with Reigns. He said, quote, a lot of the times the best stuff you also just got to because you go with the flow. He said, I'll use Roman Reigns as an example because we're talking about good stuff. If the WWE does anything good, this is the one thing they're doing right now, is Roman Reigns. His character work, his in-ring stuff, it's all great. But I feel like classic WWE, they're always 5-10 years late. This is something they should have done originally because they tried so hard to get this guy over as a babyface. They gave him X amount of WrestleMania main events and said, this is the guy, and he never really had moments until now. It's a very good point. I mean, he's not wrong. Roman Reigns knew this. And CM Punk has said this numerous times about WWE in terms of a criticism, in that they can never take the pulse. They can never take the pulse, which is so odd because there's such a dichotomy with the WWE. For a company that doesn't do long-term storytelling, for a company that literally goes week to week and every single show is ripped up and scripted again and ripped up and scripted again and all this kind of stuff, you would think they would be able to take the pulse. You would think they would be able to be flexible and realize this isn't working. Let's change. Let's go in a different direction. But they don't. They just go in the same direction and they get stubborn and they dig their heels in. And Vince McMahon is notorious for this, but it's certainly been the case with Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns has been pushed as the top babyface in WWE since 2015. We're talking 6 years at this point. 6 years. And it took 5 years of him being pushed as the top babyface for WWE to go, actually, you know what? This isn't actually working. This isn't working, or this isn't as good as it should be. And it took a pandemic for WWE to be willing to take the risk and change something when it comes to Roman Reigns. They dug their heels in for years and years. This is the guy, this is the guy. And the audience are going, you don't tell us what to think. That's the biggest issue. It was the same with John Cena. It was the same with Seth Rollins. It was the same with Roman Reigns. The audience always has a massive issue, especially a modern day audience. They have a massive issue in being told, you have to like this guy. This is the guy, this is the guy, this is the guy. And their immediate response to that is, don't tell me what to like. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me who to cheer and who to boo. I'll do what I want. I'll make up that decision for myself because as a viewer, you decide who you like and you decide who you don't like. WWE can present it in a certain vein, but they can't force you into liking someone or disliking someone. That's just how it works. That's how stars have always got over. You organically decide you like this person or you don't like that person. So being forced for years to say, oh, you have to like Roman Reigns, you have to like Roman Reigns, you have to like Roman Reigns, eventually fans went, no, we don't. No, we don't. And especially modern day characters, they're far more complex in terms of just smiling good guy babyface. It's far more complex than that. There are shades of grey and there are characters that, you know, some of the best movies involve villains being the center of the plot. People like the Joker. If Heath Ledger was still alive today, the Joker would have had his own separate movie. Joaquin Phoenix had a whole movie centered around a villain in the Joker because people find them more compelling. They've got different layers. They're different. And it's the same with Roman Reigns here. Everyone was saying for years, make this guy a heel because it will add an extra layer to him. You can just tell that the crowd isn't with him, so shove it up their behinds, you know. And it's taken them a while to do it. Now they finally did it. Thankfully, they haven't missed their opportunity. But in other cases, they have. In other cases, they have. They missed the opportunity. They can't take the pulse. They never can take the pulse. And you have Triple H and Vince McMahon saying, we listen to the audience and we can switch we can switch on a dime if we want to. And they never do. They never, ever do. If they really had their fingers on the pulse and they wanted to change things, they would have made Roman Reigns into a heel in 2015 during that build-up to the WrestleMania feud with Brock Lesnar. Now, I know people will say, wow, you talk about putting their fingers on the pulse. Well, they changed things for WrestleMania 30, and they changed things for WrestleMania this year. WrestleMania 30, they were forced to, by the way. They didn't change because they wanted to. They changed because they were forced to. This past year, Vince McMahon randomly decided halfway through the feud, you know what, Edge is old, and I don't like it because Edge is old. Dye his hair, dye his beard, make it into a triple threat match. Why? Vince McMahon's got an issue with old people. Even himself being old, I don't know why. But let's leave it there. Anyway, as always, guys, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these WWE news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or having come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.